With that, again, welcome everyone to today's Links Universal TA event, and I'll hand it over to our moderator, Marcella Movit.
Thanks, Long, and thanks everyone for joining us today to hear about state supports for correctional and reentry education. It's July 26, 2023. We are so excited to have you with us. I just wanted to share a little bit about our webinar in case you're not familiar with our Universal Technical Assistance webinars. Today's session is part of the Links Universal TA Wednesday webinar series. This happens every month. It's usually the last Wednesday of the month. So just keep that in mind as you plan for next month to join us again. This monthly series looks at different topics that are of importance to you as key members of the field. The goal in providing this webinar series is to support states in building their capacity in important areas that matter to you. As you might have noticed, our session is being recorded. This webinar and others in the series will be available on the Links YouTube channel, so please check that out so you can see other webinars in our series in case you missed them. And if you want to share this one with others that weren't able to join us today, you can do it that way as well. Now, before we jump into today's really exciting and important topic, I wanted to share with you some links resources that we have available that can support you in your work in this area. So we have developed through Links what we call Links Professional Development Guides. And we have one that highlights resources for related to this topic, to correctional and reentry education. And it sort of puts together for you all of the resources, or not all the resources, many of the resources, a great starting point to dig into this using all the different resources that are available through Links. So on the screen, you'll see just a small snapshot of what this PD guide looks like. But I encourage you to use the QR code that you will see at the bottom of the screen that takes you directly to the PD guide for correctional and reentry education across Links. There you'll see resources that we have available through our community. We have a correctional and reentry education group. Our moderator, Jeff Abramowitz, is our presenter today. So that'll be a great space for you to interact with him further. We also have resources in the Learner Center that you can use specifically with your students. Our resource collection is a great place to find vetted resources that you can use to enhance your understanding of this topic. And there you'll find over 820 resources on different things, but specifically related to this topic. I wanted to highlight for you the Integrated Education and Training and Corrections, a companion guide to the IET Design Toolkit that we'll talk about more later, but I wanted to make sure that you are aware that that was there. We also have state resources and federal initiatives. That's where you will find the landing page for the Integrated Education and Training and Corrections federal initiative and the Reentry Education Toolkit. So some great resources that are available through the PD guide. It's a great single place to go, again, to start your look at different resources related to this topic. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, our first presenter, to introduce himself. Jeff?
Thank you so much. And thank you to U.S. Department of Ed, to everybody that's helped organize this. I'm super, super excited about being able to present today, and even more excited to be presenting with my co-host, Reginald Gaines, and you're going to hear from him. So I want to just take a second and set some ground rules for today. First is that I fully understand everyone is kind of off camera, but at any point in time, if you want to engage and you have a question to ask or a thought that comes up, please feel free to put it in the chat box. I have the rock stars behind me are all going to be monitoring the chat box. box, and they'll be able to kind of guide us when a point is raised. But please feel free to enter any information in the chat box, questions you might have, and we'd be glad to deal with them head on. Don't wait till the end, kind of get them in when it crosses you. Second is that we're going to be offering and talking about a lot of resources in the next hour and a half, and a ton of good information. So I want you to be assured that all of the links and the data that we're going to be talking about is going to be provided to you. So don't worry about having to capture and write down everything that I say and all the data points that we're going to be talking about. A lot of them are going to be in the presentation, but all the links will be provided and all the resources at the very end. So we're confident about that, and we want you to really listen, engage, be thoughtful about the presentation, and we're going to get going. So buckle up for the next hour and a half. I want to start by just telling you a little about me so you can understand where I come from, and then you'll have a good idea of where the discussion is going to be going today and the glasses that I wear, because the glasses I wear today are really different than glasses that I've worn throughout my life. These are a relatively new pair, although I am getting a little bit older, and they have bifocals in them. But the truth is that I grew up in Philadelphia. I was a lawyer for a long time, practicing civil trial work in the Philadelphia and New Jersey region. And I love what I did. I was in the courtroom most of the day. I was an advocate for people. I learned and had a very valuable skill set, but I also was imperfect. I remember that about 12 years ago, my journey started where I made some very poor choices that handed me a federal indictment. That federal indictment sent me into a courtroom where, taking responsibility for my actions, I was handed a 5-year sentence in a federal prison. I returned back to Philadelphia, where I reside, and was homeless. I lived in a homeless shelter, and there began to realize and understand my passion for adult education and workforce development, and helping people that were on a similar pathway, that had made choices in their life that landed them in the carceral setting. Through my first job coming home, which was teaching GED math in North Philadelphia, a very challenging area of our country, I began to understand the complexities of helping adult learners, both behind the walls of our prisons and jails and as they came home. Quickly navigated my way to become a director of workforce development at a Title II adult literacy agency, and then moved on to become an ED of a workforce development agency in Philadelphia. Most recently, I've transitioned and currently sit as the CEO of the PD Green program, which is just this remarkable organization that does educational tutoring inside of prisons and jails across the country. We use college students to help people get smarter. So we kind of been keeping my foot on the what's happening in the field and staying very active. I was recently left my board position for the Coalition on Adult Basic Education, where I served as secretary. I have a number of positions nationally, both at a state and federal level, where I do different work in the correction setting. I'm proud to have been working as a links moderator for the community practice for correctional and reentry education in the past several years, and also work on the IET and Corrections project, and just super excited about sharing some of that information and knowledge with you today. So as you can see, I wear a very different pair of glasses, and I wear those of an administrator, an educator, a student, somebody that's been justice impacted. And I wanted to be able to share today some of the things I'm finding in the field, and as I go and travel the country, speaking with people about the trends of what is really making a difference and how we're making change happen in the world of adult education behind the prison walls and also outside. And I can actually think of no better person to co-host with me today than actually bringing the voice of a student with me along the way. And I'm so proud because I've only known Reginald Gaines since December, when I came on to the PD Green program as their CEO. But Reg, why don't you introduce yourself for everybody?
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Reginald Gaines, and I'm currently the regional manager of the PD Green program. Like Jeff, in my youth, I got myself into quite a bit of trouble. Having struggled academically for a number of reasons and getting involved in making a lot of bad decisions as a young person, I found myself serving a 7-year prison sentence in a youth correctional facility. And while there, kind of did some reconsidering of my own life's trajectory and tried to think of ways that I could kind of reshape what my future would look like. And the very beginning of that to me was to pick up where I felt like I'd left off, which was I had given up on academics in high school. So I returned to like actively pursuing a GED while inside. And after performing well, I was offered an opportunity by a college professor who was volunteering inside at the time to go to college, Rutgers University, actually. And I remember initially getting the offer and thinking that it was a joke at first. So I kind of laughed in his face because it was just so unbelievable to think that a quote unquote, I guess, hoodlum as myself would be welcomed at a prestigious university. And he sincerely leaned forward and like affirmed me and told me that he was very serious about me being able to go to college and having a second chance at building a life for myself. So after that, I enrolled in some college courses while inside and found myself as an actual college student matriculating through Rutgers University by the time I'd hit the halfway house. Post-release, I started volunteering as an AmeriCorps member at a nonprofit organization in Middlesex County, New Jersey, where I had an opportunity to serve as a tutor initially for students who were pursuing their GEDs. They were justice impacted juveniles who were trying to obtain their GEDs. So I had an opportunity to help them through that. And in my second term, I worked as a case manager for the same program. I spent some time doing some work in that area before being hired post-graduation for a higher education and prison program, for which I served 6 years as an academic advisor to students pursuing AA and BA degrees behind the wall before transitioning to the transitions team, where I started helping those students while they were in community release, enroll in community colleges and in university if they had crossed the point of pursuing their 4-year degree. Once that happened, some time spent there. I recently joined the PD Green program as a regional manager about 8 months ago. And I've now been working here, coordinating logistics for our volunteers to go and deliver high quality academic support to students pursuing college bridge programming and GEDs. So it's a
There you
pleasure
go.
to meet you all.
I love it. Thanks, Reg. So the journey today is going to be with Reg and we're going to be going back and forth, and he's going to be sharing his insights as I talk about kind of the overarching issues and starting to dive into not only the problems in adult education in the carceral setting, but also the solutions, which is really what we want to aim towards. So let's get rolling on it. Today's purpose is really to look at things like the IET, Integrated Education and Training, and what that model looks like in the corrections setting, and exploring the corrections toolkit, which was published recently. Be really looking forward to talking about that, because I've actually done some site visits and provided some technical assistance to some states, and want to share some of those experiences. I want to talk about the Digital Equity Act and digital literacy, which is so important today in the correctional education setting. And then we're going to, of course, get into Pell Grant funding and for justice impacted individuals and what that means, and how that all is what the landscape looks like today and what it will look like hopefully tomorrow, and things we could do to make it a strong system. And then really kind of using Reg to talk about best or better practices in supporting students and teachers behind the walls, both inside of the correctional setting and as people return home. So I think we need to kind of start with this graphic, which is from one of my favorite, it's one of my favorite pieces, and it's from the Prison Policy Journal, and it actually, the link is in the materials, so you'll get that. But the Prison Policy Initiative publishes this graphic every year, and it's titled "How Many People Are Locked Up in the United States?" And I just love this because it really gives us a view of our carceral setting in our country. It's not just one state, it's looking at the big picture. And as you can see on the graphic, it outlines that we have 500,000 people, 547,000 in local jails. We have 1,442,000 people in state prisons and about 208,000 in our federal prison system. And then it has some others like those that are in different sectors, like what the crimes were. It's all broken down. Super, super important as we begin to look at and consider, well, what's the state of education today? What do we talk about? Is this 100,000 people, 200,000 people, or 2 million people? And that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about really large numbers: 36,000 youth, immigration detention about 32,000, and those from involuntary commitment about 22,000. So the numbers are really there, and they tell the story. But the truth is that our country is the most incarcerated country in the entire world. And we need to recognize that it is a problem, and how we deal with it is really digging down to some of the solutions, which are education and skill training and helping prepare people for what's next in their journey, which is coming home. The one thing I always get most surprised by when I talk about the landscape of correctional and reentry education today is our pretrial system. And I'm often shocked when I get shocked looks when people recognize and see this graphic also from the whole pie, which states pretty clearly that most people that are in jail today have not even been convicted. And I asked the question, well, why are they there? And I get all these different answers, but the truth is they're there in prison or in jail because of the nature of our system. We have a cash bail system in our country, which means if you don't have cash to get out of our jail system, you end up staying in there until you get tried, until you go into court. So oftentimes, in this case, the number reflects 445,000 people in our jails, about 14,000 youth, and 64,000 in the federal system. That those are individuals that have not yet been convicted, so have not been found guilty of anything. Jails are the place where we detain people and hold them. And that happens generally until they go through our justice system, which is down the road a bit. Just tremendous graphic, and we did provide, and we'll provide you with the link to all of that as we in the materials. I do believe a person without facts is just another person with an opinion, and I believe in the facts. So let's look at the facts. The facts that surrounding adult education and literacy is that just not within the correctional setting, but just as a country, more than 54% of adults struggle with basic foundational reading, math, numeracy, and digital problem solving. 54%. That's 43 million Americans. That's generally 1 in 5 read below a 3rd grade level, and that fewer than 10% of adults that need literacy or support are actually receiving it. And that's, to me, sends a really loud message of how much more work we have to do, just not even in the carceral setting, but just in our country, just as a whole with our adult education population. And in the correctional setting, more than 70% of the 2 million people are classified as having low literacy skills. And to be quite frank with you, the revolving doors of our prisons and jails, where we see people cycling in and out constantly, is in large part because we're not doing enough educating, getting people smarter so that they can hold more than just an entry-level job. And we're going to talk about jobs and employment as we have this discussion, but we need to do a better job getting people smarter, working on the literacy skills that they need, the math skills that they need to really be successful in a career pathway. from students across this country, we know that generally low-skilled adults are more likely, 2 times more likely to be unemployed, 3 times more likely to be in poverty, 4 times more likely to be in poor health, and 8 times more likely to be incarcerated. And again, we put the link in here to this graphic that's on the screen that really lays that out for you. And when you look at those numbers, it's no wonder why we're so challenged in our prison systems and why we have such a large population in our country that's behind the walls. It's because, in part, we need to get people smarter. And education, in my mind, in my professional view, holds one of those big keys to our incarceral setting and helping solve some of this problem. So education behind the walls. Education behind the walls, and Reg, we're going to jump you in on this a little bit. We know through data that 64% of those people behind the walls are academically eligible to enroll in post-secondary programs, that they're ready. They can academically get there. 58% do not complete an education program, period, inside of our prisons and jails. It's over half are not participating in any kind of education programming. 9% complete a post-secondary program, and 7% earn some kind of credential or associate's degree. But yet, when polled, about 70% of all of our prison population want some additional education. And Reg, I want to bump to you for a second, because I think this is an important discussion for us to have when it's not just about not having, it's about many things. It's not just about people wanting it, it's being able to access it and having education behind the walls. And I'm curious, in your journey, in your experience, how you were surprised, you mentioned, of being able to go post-secondary, but how did it work behind the walls? How many people were actually receiving educational support and wanted it?
Where I was housed, the high school and GED program was mandatory if you were below a certain age, and involuntary. I think it was above the age of 26, it was voluntary. But in terms of support, it was lacking. So the culture inside the facility wasn't one of education specifically. There were programs that were available, but oftentimes they would seem aimless. So like we talked at some point, and I expressed how in my own personal academic journey, there were a lot of barriers, like harassment from officers, sometimes some inadequate teaching styles or punitive practices for maybe a lapse in understanding, etc. There's some anecdotes I could go into, and you let me know when you think when that's appropriate. Yeah.
Okay.
But even in my own professional journey, I've seen other instances where, the pursuit of academics is oftentimes discouraged by some staff members, particularly custody in some cases. And there's not a lot of support internally for the pursuit of academics. And then if you think about the framework of how the prisons are often, set up, is not necessarily with academic achievement in mind. So there's so many different things that you have to compete against, even if you're someone that will take it serious, whether that's having adequate study space or adequate academic support from folks that have a vested interest in seeing you be successful. There's no academic plans or anything like that will help a person really get to where they need. Nothing that you would think a person would have on the outside.
Yeah. So I want to stop you there, because I think there is a harsh reality that there are many things that happen in a prison and in a jail setting. There are security concerns. Right now, our country is going through a period where, getting officers and correctional officers hired is a challenge. And there's also staffing issues and transit issues, getting people to certain places. And then there's a functional requirement of facilities. So people may or may not know this, but in every prison and jail, many of the inmates serve serve to actually help the facility function. They're cleaning floors, they're preparing food, they're making sure the facility is proper, and they're running all the different programs sometimes that are within the wall. So there's a lot of different moving pieces to all of this, and there's no judgment in all this. Like, every facility in every state across the country treats things differently. And there's some that are very progressive that make education a priority and really will bump it up and kind of do things that can accommodate students. And there's others not so much. And I'm going to talk about some of those experiences today. And again, this is we're not in Vegas on this, but we are here in this webinar. And what happens in this webinar, other than the fact it's being recorded, blasted out everywhere, we'll stay in this webinar because truthfully, we're not being judgmental about this. We're being curious. We want to share with you what the data shows so that we can at least make a conscious effort to move in the right direction, which is really looking at, how do we get more people to complete a program? How do we get them that if they want to take a class, how do we get those waiting lists down? And how do we get people into post-secondary programs? And those are all the things that are going to be part of the discussion today and looking at them. So it is not just about education. And I mentioned that earlier, but we have somewhere around 500,000 people that come back into our communities each and every year. It varies from time to time, but usually 500 to 600,000 over time. And in this slide, it shows that, those that release have a number of barriers that come home. And it's been documented that there are literally over 14,000 barriers to men and women as they make the journey from incarceration back into their communities. And the reality too is in today's society, many people come home. Over 91% report some type of food insecurity upon release, and they continue to struggle, and they're 4 times more likely to die from an opioid overdose because of the wraparound support services that all come with that walk out the door the second you walk out the door. And we'll talk about some of the reentry supports, but in the education setting, we need to talk about more than just the classroom. There are many things that cause people not to persist coming home. And quite frankly, when it comes to survival, diapers for your children, for women, feminine products, getting a roof over your head, having food, dealing with drugs and addiction support, all those things chip away, and they often push education down in the ladder as they come home from they're serving their time away. There are all these barriers besides those that are documented. There's all these different pieces of the journey and these things that step in the way of people. And over 70% of those barriers, those 44,000 documented barriers, so about 70% of them relate to employment itself and getting back a job. It is very well recognized in the field that there is the unemployment rate for men and women that are justice impacted is about 27%. And that is higher than the peak of the Great Depression. We weren't even close to that during COVID. So just to put it in perspective, we're bringing people home and we're not giving them the proper skills, education, skill sets in order to be successful and to find that career once they get out. And that involves education, basic math and reading supports as well. So we talked a lot about the challenges, and we talked about the data for what the system looks like. And now I want to dive into really some of the solutions, because there are some significant solutions that we should be looking at in really fixing some of the problems in our educational setting. So start with the IET and correction. So I don't know how many, so I'm curious, and I'd like you to, if you can, I want you to throw this in the chat. How many of you on the call today actually have an IET program in that's launched, that's up and running in either your correction setting or your education setting or wherever you are? So throw it in the chat box. anyone have an IET program that's up and running? And I know some of you on the call, so I don't want to call you out. I know some of you, some of my friends are on the call, but if you could just sneak in there, what your IET is or what you're doing. But IET and the model of IET is absolutely the most amazing thing when you think about it. There you go. Ingram State Technical College. Love it. Yeah, there are a number of IETs now launching, and I've been just privileged to be part of the IET and corrections project nationally through OCTE. And I want to go through, and really for those on the call may not be so familiar, but integrated education training programs require really 3 pieces. And this just makes such good sense. The first is an adult education literacy activity. So building, that educational support, math and reading, boom. The second piece of that is the workforce training. And in some cases, I know CADD mentioned a welding program. So that's the actual training. That's the career credential, that piece of it. So now you have, let's be straight, we have a math teacher teaching fractions in or near a classroom with a carpentry teacher teaching carpentry. That just makes good sense, right? It just makes good sense. And then on top of all that, it's kind of like this cherry that you put on top of it is this workforce preparedness piece. And I'm not talking just about, I'm not talking about resume building. I'm talking serious workforce preparedness activities. Like, how do you get some people ready for work? And in this graphic that's on the screen, kind of these 3 buckets are really important. One thing you should know in my journeys and in working in IET and the project is that when it comes to this workforce piece, in talking with employers across the country, the one thing I hear over and over again is I can really teach anyone to do that trade piece. Like, we can teach them to do the trade pieces of it and teach them the weld or the carpentry. We can teach people that, and that's relatively easy. But it's those workforce preparedness stuff that often gets in the way, especially in the justice sector, where, teaching someone how to be on time, how to want to learn at work, how to wear their pants so maybe their butt crack isn't showing, like really basic things that, conflict resolution, another big thing. So understanding that, how to communicate, awesome point, Caddy, how to communicate effectively with coworkers. These are things that are really difficult. And I want to get on a soapbox now because people often call them soft skills. In the justice setting, there is nothing soft about these skills. These are essential, hard skills for people to really learn, because quite often the people that are impacted in our justice system are men and women that may not have ever had those skills developed or taught to them, or a role model that could have guided them to some of these key things that they need to know in order to navigate the workplace. So really super important. And Reg, we're going to talk to you in a second about the training piece, because I'm going to get you there. But the IET programs that are out there, and IET and corrections is one of the best models. And it really, as this slide depicts, the IET programs have to have certain pieces that really are essential in its development. Being sufficient in intensity and quality. They'll offer those 3 elements we talked about simultaneously. And I think the word simultaneously throws people off. Like, do they have to all be concurrent in one class and happening at the same exact time? No, they need to happen contemporaneously with each other. So if someone's learning fractions, doesn't have to be while they're cutting wood. It's got to be, well, maybe they're taking the fraction class later on so they can understand how much wood to cut and understand how to add and subtract it. Occupationally relevant instruction materials, like, really has to be guided into a career pathway, an occupational license or occupational credential that hopefully, this is the most important, is stackable, right? Because having a credential is one thing, have a stackable credential, well, that's that's the gold standard, something you can build on. Having a single set of learning objectives set out, so you know what the goal is of your students and how they're going to achieve it. And again, aligning with the state content standards. And this is a discussion. I know I'll call him out, but I know my friend Alex Harris is on the call today. But they do some great work in understanding, what are the state standards and how do we develop them? How do we advocate for them so that they become relevant, and making sure that you align your work with the state standards, and then being part of a career pathway, really giving them that direction of where they're going to go for that career. So the IET and Corrections, I'm super proud of working on this project, but the IET and Corrections project published a companion guide, a toolkit guide, the IET Design Toolkit, and it's part of the Links resource collection. So if you want to see just a great toolkit and a great guide, and Long, thank you, you posted it in the chat box. We have the link as part of this material. Go check out the IET Design Toolkit, because this toolkit will take you from step one all the way through the process of what you need to know in order to launch an IET in your facility. And again, this is one of the graphics that's on the screen under federal WIOA IET requirements. And it really kind of lays out for you really simple, those 3 buckets and all those other pieces of the puzzle. So not sure, Reg, where you were, did they have an IET at any point?
I can't say yes. Based on my assessment of the academic program offerings that were there, it looked like they meant well, but the programs were aimless, I would say. So the one credential you could get was the GED program. So you could definitely have a GED or high school diploma, but everything else was more like kind of like you're exposed to a trade or or academics. So even the college program was like, you would have some college courses in pursuit of maybe like a business management certificate. Or if you were to participate in welding, you learned how to do a stringer weld or figure eight, but you didn't really know how to set up the equipment. You didn't walk away from it as an expert. They did have OSHA certification, but and they also had carpentry, and that may have been one of the ones where you could at least be a little more prepared for a career, but still like no certifications there.
So we're gonna get back into this in a second, because Reg, I think you hit on a big and my point of asking that question was really to for people to understand that oftentimes in my travels around the country, in talking to correctional instructors inside and vocational training and providers and certification providers, is that actually they're so close to actually having one that a lot of times I was in West Virginia and provided some technical assistance to the state of West Virginia, and they have some remarkable programs there. And it wasn't until I sat their instructors down, all of the instructors, their training instructors and their GE and their educational team, and we sat down, we started talking about it, and they're like, IET, oh no, what is this whole new thing we got to create? And then the more we talked about it, the more they said, you know what? We're already doing this. I send Reg over to the math GED class just to learn fractions so he could pass his test. And so the point is that, a lot of institutions are really close to doing this. It's not a heavy lift. It's about bringing everybody to the table, really with intentionality, and really looking at what are those pieces that you need to put things together. And Reg, we're going to talk about this, because having it is one thing, but having it and making sense is another. So This slide lays out career and technical education, IET and adult education, what makes sense. Like what makes sense for men and women that are justice impacted. And it's really important, if you're going to launch or get into IET in your facility, then you need to think, what is it that people can do when they leave prison or jail? And, quite frankly, there are some jobs, and it has changed dramatically over the last few years. And we're seeing, because right now there are more jobs out there than people to fill them. This opening window now for people that are justice involved is really coming front and center for a lot of employers. But as an IET, doing an IET inside of the correctional setting, we need to understand that the first thing we should be thinking about is what is it that our students want to do? What is it that the men and women that are behind the walls in your facility, what is it that they want to do? Because if you train someone in something that they have no interest in doing, and you give them a certification and you invest this time in them in the IET, and they leave the facility and they don't do it, then they might have gotten some transitional or some transferable skills. I get all that, but the goal is to get people into what they love to do. So taking a poll and targeting those people to walk through just any of these. So you'll see this list is pretty awesome. It's auto mechanics and Barber School and Barber Shop and CDL, Carpentry, Construction, Horticulture, HVAC, Machine Shop, Masonry. I mean, OSHA, all plumbing, printing, welding, warehouse operations, flagger, fiber optics, like all these things could be our potential really solid careers for men and women as they leave their prison and jail. And if we could provide them with that certification, but it often means starting with asking the question, what is it that you want to do? What are you interested in? And then seeing in your facility, is it right? Does it make sense for us? Once it makes sense for the student, then the next thing you need to make sure is, can they actually do that? You know, there was a law in Pennsylvania that changed several years ago through work that we were doing about barber shops. So a barber in Pennsylvania several years ago, they could not get their license renewed if they served time away. Now, that made no sense whatsoever, but the law was eventually changed. So you should be thinking about occupational licensing laws that are available, and can people get licensed if they have a felony conviction on their record, so that we know that they're able to actually do the job before you launch into the IET. Yeah. So Lisa mentions in a comment that it's important for facilities to partner with local workforce boards so they know exactly what the labor market needs are. Yeah, super good point. When we talk about an IET, everyone needs to be at the table, and that includes employers and your local workforce boards, your career one-stop, your WIOA, your career partners, the American Job Centers, Department of Labor, Department of Education, Department of Labor's, they need to start talking a lot better, right? So that we can understand how we can get people back to work and what employers are out there, employment opportunities are out there. But every state in our country publishes a list of high priority jobs in their region. And we should be looking to those and saying, okay, these are the jobs that are coming down. Fiber optics right now, man, we're the Digital Equity Act, which I'll talk about in a minute, is a huge, important law that's coming down that opens all this window of opportunity up, and looking at some of those careers are really important. And Reg, you told a story about welding. I know you were in a welding program, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's important for everybody to understand that there are some programs that are in jails and prisons that don't necessarily lead to a career credential. In your program, you just got a certificate, right?
Yeah, and it was more like a certificate of participation, not like I was certified to actually do the job.
Right. It wasn't an industry recognized credential,
No.
which would allow you to go out, walk out the door and actually do the job, right?
No.
And that's super important. That's something that you want to be thinking about, is if you're going to offer a training program, then gosh, maybe you should make it something that is a recognized credential, so that when men leave the facilities, that they actually have something to show for it and they can actually get a job. And there are some in this slide, there are nationally accredited certifications that they're just not huge lifts. The American Welding Society, OSHA for sure, ServSafe, which is a gigantic one, giving people restaurant and food service qualifications, the NCCER in construction, environmental protection, the EPA, and forklift driving. These are just some of the recognized credentials that can really, really help people as they walk out the door. And I'll give you some inside scoop. Reg, you could tell me if I'm wrong, but it's more than just the piece of paper. It's this thing of accomplishment. Like when you come home and you're getting back on your feet, you've been kind of beaten down for a while by the justice system in one way or another, and coming home and having this certification, this credential, it validates some of your time away. It says, I wasn't just doing nothing. I actually spent some time trying to better myself. And it goes a long way, not only just for the certification in front of an employer, but just mentally helping you drive forward into that next career, your next journey. Correct? Am I wrong,
Yeah.
Reg?
No, you're absolutely 100% correct. I think once you experience incarceration, it kind of feels like the floor has been ripped out from under you, and you're already self-conscious and aware of like the stain that's on you. There's a huge gap in your employment record. You have no experience, and you already are very concerned about your employability. So being able to walk out with something like this, what we used to say inside is do the time, don't let the time do you. And that's kind of something that we would look for, like to be able to walk out and say, I am confident in this thing, and I can walk into any office and, you know, secure a job because I'm qualified and experienced to do this thing. And so when you don't have that, you're kind of fumbling around. And I remember for myself, I didn't really start experiencing the confidence that you speak of until I started making like the dean's list at college and, you know, accomplishing courses and certification programs while in college.
I love it. Great stuff. I knew I brought you on for a reason. So federal legislation is something that I do want to hit on. And if you remember in 2021, November 15th, the president signed the $1.2 trillion law into effect, the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act. And what this law did was it actually is diverting funds to do things like build our bridges and repair our roads and build infrastructure and broadband. And that's all this is in an effort to build our workforce systems and to develop different programs that can help people in different, anyone to help our country. And with all these jobs coming down, doesn't it really just make good sense for us to try and direct some of those people that are incarcerated into those jobs, into those building the broadband system and digital literacy? We're going to talk about that in a second. But one of the things that you should be thinking about is how do we get some of the men and women that are coming home prepared for this barrage of jobs and opportunities that are going to be laying right at their feet when they come home. And part of this is the Digital Equity Act. So in the infrastructure bill was this unbelievably cool act called the Digital Equity Act. I am a huge fan. And the reason I'm a fan is because when I came home, it's 8 years ago in September, I promised myself that I was going to do everything I possibly could to make sure that there was digital access and digital equity in our prisons and jails. It is probably the top 2 or 3 priorities for me coming home and in my professional life, professional career. $2.7 billion in funding is coming down for digital skills and access. And that in the bill itself and in the law, there's a justice call out. There's a call out for justice system stakeholders, for prisons and jails to do a better job, to start thinking about how do we embed access into our and skill training for computers into our programming, so people are really prepared. And digital literacy to me is just more than learning how to use a computer. It's understanding hardware and gaining access, because you could have all the hardware and equipment, but if you can't use it, very frustrating coming home. I've worked with well over 10,000 men and women since I've been home. And one of the biggest challenges that we face is as they come home, navigating a computer. Reg, can you give me a little bit on this? How hard was that for you coming home, navigating a computer and getting back on your feet with that?
Yeah, so I think when I came out, it was right after Apple iPhones had blown up, smartphones, etc. Those things didn't exist before I went in right before that exploded onto the scene. So returning back to that was kind of an uphill battle, especially with whatever anxiety that I experienced. This variety of tabs, internet was different. Like when I was sent to prison, everyone didn't even have a computer. That was like a luxury, and they were still using dial-up. When I came home, it was like high-speed internet. You just got multiple tabs, multiple windows, multiple browsers, sign-ins and passwords. And so I think the surface that got scratched on the way out was like Microsoft Word and things like that. But now I'm a full-blown college student, kind of fumbling my way through databases and portals and emails. And so it got really difficult, and not even mentioning apps. So
Yeah.
I think it would have been a lot easier having someone to be able to either teach me just kind of comprehensively or guide me through it, as opposed to fumbling around. I got the hang of it though.
Eventually, well, you're working for me. I hope you did. The truth is that, one of the big challenges we have, and this all connects, it connects to the workforce as well. Look, we task people when they come home to get a job, right? To get back that career. And we have them sit down at a computer when they come home and download their resume or cut and paste into a job application when they come home. These are skills that if they learned while they were away and they knew how to turn on a computer, how to get a Gmail account, how to put their resume or download a document, what even that meant, what a USB is, like all these kind of basic computer skills. If we could do that at the very beginning, and while people are incarcerated, I mean, that would be so important to helping people kind of navigate that next piece, that next challenge, which is the career pathway. And even as Reg said, being successful in college. And that's one of my fears. And we're going to talk about that, about the Pell window opening and opening the college door. So one of the great resources on this slide, you'll see building the technology ecosystem. And this is really about being intentional and considering the things you need to do inside of correctional facilities. This is a wonderful document that Octay has produced. And it's a discussion about how you build this infrastructure inside of prisons and jails, the technical infrastructure, the network, the access, the security, the curriculum, funding, and culture. And there are some crazy states doing amazing work. I was with some people from Maine. I'm giving them a shout out because Maine is probably one of the few states in our country that actually allows internet access. And it's working. And people are they're job searching before they walk out the door, and that they've built the system. So I think the excuse anymore that it's not safe, that we can't do it, is just nonsense. We should flush that away because states are doing it and they're doing it well. They're developing curriculum, they're getting funding streams. And now with the Digital Equity Act, this funding that's coming down, gosh, if I am a correctional facility or working in the corrections or reentry setting, I want to start thinking about how I'm building a computer lab and getting digital access for our students and a digital equity program, and really starting to change culture, because funding is coming down now at every state. So last July, every state filed their digital equity plan, and the rollout of some of these RFPs are coming out. And I know firsthand because I was assigned and appointed to the Broadband Commission here in Pennsylvania, where I'll be working and sharing what happens in the correctional setting so that we can understand what's needed and how we can start bridging that gap. I'm really excited about it. So what states are doing are some crazy good stuff. Louisiana, Maine, Wisconsin, Ohio, Colorado. If you're on any of those states and you want to give me a shout out in the chat box right now, I welcome it because I'm giving you one. You're doing some great stuff. And the truth is things like putting dedicated staff for digital literacy. Developing their curriculum inside. So getting people a strong curriculum, understanding, the right selection of device and who to use and what vendors are out there, and being really intentional and thinking it through. Instructional strategy, and not just throwing people into a lab and saying, go to it. Go through and try and learn on your own, but really thinking about instructional strategy and what works, and guiding people, and hopefully thinking about using tutors, right, to do some of that. Student teacher preparation, and really helping people prepare better for some of this. And then what policies and practices make good sense for the institutions behind the walls and even in the reentry setting. But it's happening, and look at some of these states and be guided by them and ask questions. In the words of be curious and really ask those questions about what's happening. I was about to say my favorite Ted Lasso episode is about being curious and not judgmental. We want to be curious in this space. So reach out and find out what really makes sense. So I want to switch gears for a little bit because I know that the Pell Grant reinstatement on this slide shows that we have students preparing for post-secondary and going to college. And I'm going to be honest with you because I think there's some things that we need to talk about when we talk about the Pell Grant reinstatement. So recently in July, this beginning of this month, effective July 2023, there was an increase in Pell Chance providers, and also the Pell Grant window opened up in the incarceral setting. And I have to correct this because I think it's larger than 460 eligible students. I recently read, and I'll add it as a link there, that it's upwards of 700,000 eligible students for Pell Grant opportunity and looking into the future. There is a wonderful document as part of the resource collection that if you haven't checked out, you need to check out, which is Beyond the Box 2023. And that's really looking at the Pell Grant initiative. And Long, thank you for throwing it into the chat box. This is a resource that is recently published. And I will tell you, it is just an unbelievable, great resource tool. But here's the challenge. The challenge is we have a lot of people that are eligible for the Pell Grant window, but Pell Grant, as many people know, is a one and done. Like if you apply for it and you start it, that it's not like you can start and stop and come back and it's one. You need to be prepared for college. And many of the men and women we work with and our students may have that high school diploma, but may not necessarily be college ready. They may not be ready to make that next leap. So I want you to be really thoughtful about your college bridge programming and preparing people for that next level. I know we have instituted a number of college bridge programs that are unbelievably successful, that are doing great work. One in particular at Fort Dix, a prison, where we're working to get people ready and bridging them with math and reading so they're successful at college. So opening the window up is wonderful and it's tremendous, but getting people prepared and making sure they're ready for that next step, even more important. And something that I want you to keep in mind as we have this discussion, and I know Reg, you're overseeing the program at Fort Dix currently, which is a federal facility, but it is one of the shining stars of our program. It just shows the need for helping people get ready for that next level. And one of the other things that's happened is this great recognition from OCTAE and from the government that we can't do this just looking at the Pell Grant window itself, but we have to make FAFSA even easier. And I'm really glad to see that our Department of Education's jumped on this with the FAFSA Simplification Act, because it makes paper submissions now available, selective service waivers that are part of it, fresh start for defaulting on loans and giving people an opportunity. Makes verification of your high school equivalency so much easier, and a waiver of income requirement, and also ID assistance. So you're helping people really navigate getting into post-secondary and getting into college. Just remarkable shout out. We've come a long way. We have a long way to go to see it also in play and work out some of the tweaks, but the link for the FAFSA Simplification Act, Long put it in the chat box. It's also as part of the presentation. So I invite you to check it out. Super, super important. So I love the term better practices in state and correctional reentry education. Reg, you're gonna help me on some of these, but I like better practices as opposed to best practices. And that's because if it's the best, then why do we try to do any better, right? So I like the idea of better practices. We're always striving to do better. And now we're going to start digging into some of them. In our educational systems, there are challenges that we have to recognize that our teachers face. So let's go through them. We're going to be honest again. We're here. We're almost family now, but challenges facing teachers include a huge staffing shortage of not only teachers, but correctional officers. We're seeing across the country now, we're just coming out of COVID, but lockdowns were a huge problem throughout COVID. And even now, lockdowns cause some problems when it comes to adult education inside of the walls, because you can't learn when you're inside of a cell and you're locked in a number of hours in the day. There are scheduling priorities that we talked about, being able to schedule things so that people can hold a job. And holding a job is not just doing a need for a facility, but those jobs, as low as the pay is in prisons and jails, those jobs, they pay something. And although it's sometimes 9-10 cents on the dollar or 25 cents, that money is used to help them buy essential things like toothpaste and soap and shampoo and things that will help them function so they don't have to ask their family to support them while they're away. Important things like that. Digital access and resources we talked about, classroom space are really practical concerns. Professional development. Just not enough professional development. And if you're not, I'm giving myself a shout out now, but if you're not part of the Links community of practice for correctional and reentry, you need to get on there. It's links.ed.gov. Just go on. It's free 95. It doesn't cost you anything. And you're going to have access to all these links, resources, and everything else. So check it out. And then Reg, you talked about it and started talking about it, was education culture and really changing the culture behind the walls and getting people to recognize the importance of adult literacy and adult education. So I want to throw this to you, Reg, for a sec. If you could talk to us a little bit, what did you see? What were the just wearing and you do it now as an instructor and coming in as a professional from the outside, but what do these challenges strike you? And what are the things that, that are on your radar screen when it comes to the challenges facing teachers?
Yeah, so I do want to qualify my criticism, right? It's not really person-centered, it's systemic. The truth is that over the years, and even while like during my professional career and during incarceration, I've met a lot of great people who have passionate hearts, really intentional about assisting and wanting to make a change and prioritizing education and being success advocates. It's just systemically what we often see, particularly in the space of academics, is things like limited funding, limited access to technology for one reason or another, overcrowding and limited space specifically for instruction and or study, things like living learning communities that have huge benefits on academic pursuits in large groups. High staff turnover, security concerns, lack of individualized instruction, limited course offerings, barriers to reentry support, and I think a big one in some cases, it's not everywhere, but in some cases, the stigma and attitudes towards education kind of is like really discouraging in a lot of cases. I think there's limited data collection and assessment for this type of stuff, like inside and in reentry. And I'm, again, remember that this is systemically. And so I think that if we actually had this structured on a systemic level where this was built into the aspect of corrections, right? So, you're getting in trouble, you're being taken away from society as a corrective measure, you're serving time. Let's structure everything of what we do toward equipping this person who, in a lot of cases, came to prison for some type of environmental circumstance or economic insecurity, and if it wasn't for that, they're definitely going to go back to that in many, many cases. So let's prepare them, right? Because a large concern is what I talked about earlier, right? Aimlessness. What do I do when I get out? How am I going to support myself when I get out? How am I going to support my family? What direction am I supposed to go in? Where am I going to get these skills from? Who's going to hire me, etc.? And so if we kind of built all of this in, the person should be walking out. Ideally, an individual should be walking out with the confidence, the knowledge, the skills, the abilities, and the credentials to pursue gainful employment.
So Reg, you just hit on so many great things, and I knew I brought you on for a reason. It's awesome. So thank you. But the three things that struck a chord with me just now. The first was disability. And, there are such a huge number of men and women that are students inside of the correctional setting that have a learning disability, and being able to understand that and actually test for it and know how we can work with what's the best way of teaching men and women that have some kind of learning disability is tremendously important. And acknowledging it, and quite often they're just undiagnosed. No one ever sat them down and really gave them the tests and really tried to figure out why they couldn't do some things when it came to learning. And that was the first thing. The second thing you mentioned, which was data collection, and shame on all of us. Shame on all of us for not doing a better job really collecting the data to support the great work we're doing. If you're on this call and you're an administrator, a state administrator, state educator, man, we need to think about documenting and showing the work that we're doing. And the only way to do that is through data collection, showing how many students we have advanced, how many moved up the ladder, got their GED, got a credential, got a stackable credential, moved on. And we need to do a better job at data collection and data sharing. And it's one of the big frustrations nationally is getting people to really be accountable. I was in West Virginia doing technical assistance, and I was talking to them about one of their facilities and about the challenge that they had. And when I started talking to the teachers, the instructors were telling me that one of the biggest challenges they faced was actually correctional officers making sure students left their cells to go to the classes. They didn't care. And this idea of educational culture is so important in the work that we do that we really should be thinking about with intentionality. How do you change the culture? And it starts from the top. It starts involving your wardens, your superintendents, your supervisors in this process so that they're part of it and they understand the importance of it and the benefits that it draws from all of it. So Reg, thanks for sharing, but you're not getting off the hook. Because Reg, this is the one that I really want you to be talking about, which is really the challenges facing our students. Many of our students come with very little, if any, prior school experience, where they may have had a really bad experience at some point in their life, maybe didn't finish grade school at times, or are reading at a second or third grade level. And they have in the prison system, it's all about protecting yourself and navigating that system. And I call it the cone of shame. The cones of shame for dogs, when they go get surgery and stuff.
Yeah.
So this is like the cone of shame in prison that really that we don't wear on the outside, but we have, where students don't want to step up and say, that they can't read or they can't write or they can't do math because it makes them appear less than to the people that they live with. And I was in SCI Green in Pennsylvania, state correctional facility, and they started a program where it's they meet anonymously with another inmate that tutors them so that they do it with dignity, and it's not a call out that you can't read or write. It's just, here's how you can get some help. Job priorities inside, obviously learning challenges, wait list frustration, and unbelievable how many people want to take classes but are waitlisted or they don't qualify for some criteria and therefore can't get into a program. Correctional culture and then education culture. So Reg, I'm going to throw it to you because I want to hear from you and from your perspective, what were the challenges that you faced inside in actually securing educational support that you needed?
It was honestly not really existent in a formal sense. I had two instructors. I had no tutors, just two instructors, and I had one teacher who did really great. But the truth is, the material that I worked with that instructor was material that I'm naturally good at. Whereas my other instructor, she was my math instructor. I was very afraid of math. And just to highlight how afraid, by the time I hit college and took a pre-calculus exam, my palms had sweat in a way that never happened before in my life. I felt like I was about to fight a lion. I failed that exam, by the way. But just to go back into the prison setting, I remember specifically, and I'm just going to give you an anecdote to kind of shape what the challenge was. I was sent to do some homework. I think it was like conversions between fractions and percents and decimals. And I remember doing the homework, bringing it in, and I showed the work to my instructor, and she just immediately kind of was like, this is all wrong. It was just like red inking all over my paper. And she didn't start writing what the right answer was right in front of me. This is how you do it. She's writing out the answer. And I tried to stop her, and I'm like, hey, how come this is how you do it? Can you show me where I went wrong in what I tried to do? Because I showed my work. And she got very upset about that and was like, just do it the way I'm saying do it. And I tried to tell her, I can't learn that way. Like, I need to first understand what it is about the way that I did it that was wrong. And then I can understand the right way to do it. I don't know why I need to learn it that way, but this is what would be helpful to me. And that ended up turning into a confrontation where I was written a blue sheet for being insubordinate. And then the officer that was there that worked kind of intervened and basically told me to apologize to her for not just accepting whatever it was that she said. And then I was welcomed back into class, and the blue sheet was downgraded to a white sheet. I still got disciplined for it. At which point I stopped asking questions in class, and I just took every worksheet possible, and I locked myself in my cell for the next couple of months until I learned the math on my own. And I was finally able to take the GED pass, and thankfully I passed. And I think math is what I scored the lowest on, and still went on to struggle with math later on in life and in my college career. So I say that to say, I also learned later on that, to your point, I struggled with ADHD, and that was undiagnosed. Once I finally learned it in college, I went all the way back to just when I first started struggling in school with these types of subjects. And I can see now all of the evidence of this behavioral issue, this cognitive behavioral issue that I was struggling with, that was never treated. I never received assistance. And truthfully, inside, this is one of the bigger problems that I think goes largely unaddressed. Even in my professional career, I've seen countless students who struggle with real, actual debilitating learning disabilities that if they received adequate support, they could be much more successful at their academic support, at their academic pursuits. But it's not, there's nothing there. It's not even, in a lot of cases, it's sad to say, it's not even considered. And so you see some of them kind of get shooed along, and then they join some of the more difficult academic programs, and they struggle really bad.
Well, thanks, Reg, and thanks for sharing all that. Definitely things that we want on our screen, but what should be on your radar screen? So the things that are happening going forward and things you want to be thinking about are blended learning programs. Adult learners, they learn better when they're blended programs, and blended programs has multiple meanings. Contextualized learning tools is one, but when I talk about blended learning, I'm talking about those that are both live and virtual, or providing resources and support in multiple forms, where they're getting some support on their own, and then they're doing some being guided by instructors or by tutors or by others that are helping them, and opening the door to some virtual learning where they can actually learn through remote programming on iPads or computers that might be available. Better materials, thinking about better platforms and better content, giving people the opportunity to everybody learns differently, but there's so much good content out there for every subject, as well as for vocational training programs, but really looking at some of those that are some of those tools that are out there and platforms that could be really beneficial. Virtual reality and virtual learning tools are the newest thing. I'm just enthralled at seeing some of these virtual reality tools. I just used one recently in Lancaster County where they had those goggles on me, and I was doing I was in a manufacturing plant, and I was doing some stuff with steel, and they're tremendous because, number one, they teach people, give them some real experience, what it's like doing it. They're unbelievably real when you watch them, but more importantly, the class watches and they learn from other people's mistakes as well. So virtual reality is a way of the future, and something that there are a lot of great programs out there that are starting to come embedded inside of the correctional setting you should be looking at. And then obviously digital literacy support, tablets and laptops and things of that nature that could be super helpful are things that we should be looking at to integrate in our programs. There's one thing to talk about education behind the walls, but as I often explain, when you walk outside of a prison or jail, there's this unbelievably fast flowing water. And our jobs as educators is to connect people behind the walls with support services on the outside. And it frustrates me that I see men and women that are this close to getting their high school equivalency, this close, one test away, one small piece away, and they leave the carceral setting and they don't know where to go. Like they don't have that, they don't have somebody to help them across that fast flowing water to get them on the other side. And that's what we have to be thinking about, is like when someone leaves a facility, where are they going to go to continue their education? How can they they've come so close to finishing their degree or finishing their whatever their certification is, where are they going to go next? So looking at adult literacy agencies in this graphic, career one-stops or American job centers are all across the country, and they're remarkable tools for helping people gain education and educational support and vocational training. And for the longest time, our American job centers, there was a push to get people to work. And now we're starting to see more of this integration of education so we can get people smarter and skilled and also get them to work. They're not mutually exclusive anymore. Our community colleges, and looking at working better with our community colleges to get them involved in the process. Apprenticeships is one of the most amazing tools that's out there today, because you're actually getting people to work and you're teaching them at the same time and understanding how we can use apprenticeships to support the work we're doing. And then employers and unions and workforce development boards. Look, this is going to take an entire village. It's not going to take one person, one agency. It's not just behind the walls or outside of the walls. This is everyone coming together in one space to kind of make it all happen. And I want to talk about the village, because when men and women come home, there are a lot of challenges. We heard about all the barriers when people come home, but things that really need to be thought about are the simple things like a driver's identification, driver's license, or clothing, or a social security card. Look, people can't go back to work unless they have those essential pieces of identification, and clothing and transportation and basic needs are right up at the top of the ladder. Housing is one of the biggest challenges men and women have coming home, and we don't often think about housing and education together, but persistence and making sure people have a good place to live, skill training and employment are really important. But I remember working with a student in one of and when I was a director, and a teacher had come to me and said, Mr. A, this student's having trouble. Can you talk to him? He just smells horribly bad. And I talked to John after class, and I mentioned to John, I said, how you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm doing great, Mr. A. I'm like almost past my third part of my high school equivalency. I'm on target. I'm like, no, how you doing in life? And he went on to tell me that he just had a new baby. He's got 3 kids at home, and he's working 3 jobs. And he said, oh, I just barely make it from my overnight job at the meatpacking plant. And I'm like, oh, God. So he's working at a meatpacking plant overnight and coming to class just to make it to class. And of course, he's going to smell not so good. So we were able to get him a membership at the YMCA, get him a place to shower and a meal for breakfast in the morning. But I often think about, like, what would have happened if we didn't have that discussion? And I think as educators that we need to recognize that our job is not just contained within the 4 walls of our classroom, that it's also helping people persist outside so that they can continue to keep coming and they can be successful. And then recognizing as well that, people that are justice involved, they still have addiction challenges and medical challenges to meet and legal challenges. And we need to think about how we can work with them to kind of incorporate all of that into the system. So Reg, we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to be mindful of time, and this graphic kind of lays out the village. But in this, Reg, what posed the biggest challenge for you coming home?
Man, a lot of stuff strikes a chord, Jeff. I'll say of all of it, probably housing and skill training and employment. So I was just running and gunning once I was released. My first job was in the halfway house. I got to work for a summer at the Upward Bound program, and that was given to me because a director at the program saw that I was working really hard, and an advocate for mine at the college asked him if he could give me something that would keep me being able to get out the halfway house over the summer. I was released in September, and I hit poverty like a brick wall. I was released in 2011. I was not gainfully employed until 2016. So
Wow.
I spent 5 years surviving off of student loan checks. So you can imagine that my loans are very high. And I got an $800 stipend as an AmeriCorps volunteer. So on the side of that, I stood in food pantry lines every Saturday. I ran ice at restaurants and clubs Friday nights to try to make ends meet, to get a couple of dollars while I pursued education during the day and afternoon on top of a court mandated drug program. So it was really difficult. There were times where the electric was off, the gas was off, there was no food in the fridge. We lost our apartment, was homeless for a while. And there was some struggle to get credentialing so I could drive to school. It was a lot. It was a lot. And I wouldn't have made it if I didn't have the financial aid checks. So getting good grades was my hustle.
There you go. Well, it's a good hustle, but unfortunately, it's a tough journey. I remember my first job coming home was teaching GED math in North Philadelphia, making $7 an hour, and that sprung into a career pathway for me. But those are the challenges people have coming home, and surviving off a minimum wage is a huge challenge. I do want to. Heather mentioned a point that there was a variance in abilities and little time for individual assessment when we're talking about disability, individual disabilities. Look, I'll be honest with you that I know that time is hard inside, but time is, we need to prioritize certain things, and getting people assessed and understanding what their challenges are is the first place you need to start, and understanding what level they're at and how we can support them better. So it needs to become a priority, and we need to bump it up on our priority list. I will tell you, I'm really excited that the resources that we've provided today are in our resource collection on links, and there'll also be a resource handout that's being given. Our links community is a wonderful community, because it's not just about correctional and reentry education, but there are career pathways and diversity, equity, and inclusion and learning disability. There are all these different communities in there. And honestly, I belong to all of them because I think it's some great programming. But if you have a chance, you really need to be part of the Links network. And again, it's free. And Octave just does this remarkable job at providing all those resources, which could really make your job so much easier and help you in the moving forward. The Links community is easy. It's just links.ed.gov. If you go to the community section, you do need to register. It's kind of easy process. And there's the QR code, for it, and makes it super easy. I do want to give, we have a few minutes left, and I wanted to open the door up for any questions that you may have. We covered a ton of information today, and a huge shout out to Reginald Gaines for everything. And Reg, thanks for sharing out today. This is, I told you eat a elephant one bite at a time, right? And this is just this huge elephant that we need to think about fixing, and we're going to do it all together. So more programs like this, where we're having this discussion and we're engaged in the community. I just will also give one small, in August this year, we're going to be all of August, we're going to the Links it's summertime. So my community of practice, the Correctional and Reentry community of practice, has 18 holes on the links. And for every day of the month, we'll be addressing another issue in the Correctional and Reentry setting and providing resources and having great discussion about them. So, break out your golf clubs. And if you're not a golfer, that's okay. You can caddy for us and share in the links community of practice coming up. Any questions? We got a few seconds left, but any questions from anybody regarding anything? Is there any supports for children and women who are released that need to navigate foster care system to try and get? Yeah, so that's a great question. Thanks, Linda. There are many supports for women, specifically targeting people that are in the foster care system, and it's different and it varies state by state. So you want to be really careful navigating these, and one of the best resources are usually your city, the foster care agencies. What I do is, and here's the secret sauce, I'll give it to you, Linda, because you asked. So just about many of the almost all the big cities and many of the small cities have what they call reentry coalitions. So these reentry groups or reentry coalitions are all the stakeholders. So some provide addiction support, housing support, education support, whatever it is when people come home. You want to reach out to your local coalition. And in Pennsylvania, we have a Pennsylvania state coalition, reentry coalition. And those reentry coalitions, they are the network. They're the people you want to go to ask the questions. Okay, who does this and who does this? And there are some support services that provide childcare that are state funded or that are privately funded. And the reentry coalitions are the places that you need to go to in order to kind of get some of that. I know, Linda, you're from Vermont, and I'd be glad to send you some of those, some of the resources that I know of that are in Vermont. But the coalitions, the reentry coalitions. So if you just Google Vermont reentry coalitions, it'll pop up, and check out and see who's doing that good work in your state or in your city. And they are all over the place. So I hope that was somewhat of a help. Anybody else?
Jeff, while others are maybe thinking about what questions they have, I'm going to ask Long to pull up our poll to find out if anyone is interested in continued support on this incredible and very important topic. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is just one of the ways that links provide technical assistance to states. So we'd love to find out if you'd be interested in getting some more support. Right.
So Marcella, while you're doing that, I do want to mention that that there was a comment about support services for women. And quite honestly, there are a lot of support services around the country for women, not nearly enough. And the challenges that women face coming home are really different than the male population. So specifically look for women's support services that can help. And I don't think Reg is offended because he's a male, but they are really different. And women definitely have different needs and a system that's way different to navigate when they come home. So I hope you'll, just try and target really well the support services you're looking for.
Great.
Great. And thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you so much to Jeff. Sorry, before we move on, to Jeff and Reg for sharing your experiences. I am absolutely blown away by what you both shared. You'll be a very tough act to follow, but I wanted to share a little bit of information about next month's webinar. It will be on research to inform stronger adult education, ESL policy and practice. It'll be on August 3rd from 3 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern, just like today's. The link to register, if you'd like to join us for that, is in the chat. And as you're thinking of any final questions for Jeff and Reg, if you have any questions that you'd like to hear about from our presenters for next month's webinar, please feel free to put those in the chat as well so that we can make sure that we're addressing your needs with that. And I just want to make sure I said August 30th. I might have said the date wrong. All right.